Now to a developing story out of Cuba. More protests are expected tonight across the island. Residents there are enduring increasingly severe blackouts, lasting in some cases 20 hours or more, as the government struggles to secure sufficient fuel supplies. The grid has experienced multiple partial or total collapses. People have been gathering in the streets all week.
Hey all, come on in to O'Reilly's Corner, where we keep the lights on current political issues as well as past egregious acts, of which there are plenty. Hey, please take a second and just hit that like and subscribe buttons. I know you've all heard it before, but it really helps out the channel, and I greatly appreciate it. You just hit it. It's free, no obligations, nothing. So yeah, there's a lot going on in Cuba, obviously. But here's the bottom line. The nation of Cuba is a failed government-run state that has imprisoned its people, not just physically, but socially and economically as well. The Cuban people have been suffering for decades, many of them for their whole lives. I have some knowledge of families in Cuba, and they say right now the conditions are horrific, even by their own standards. I consider myself an outsider, but I have been to Havana many times, probably over 100 times in my life, and I've come to know the people of Cuba. They are amazing in their strength, their agility, their kindness, and their generosity. But I haven't been there in over 20 years. They weren't very optimistic back then, but they are optimistic now, even as they brace for the hardest times of their hard lives. And that's just it. This is not about Cuba being a threat to the U.S. They really aren't. It's about liberating this prison nation once and for all. It's about ridding this hemisphere of the only communist nation. It's about regime change, too, despite the denials. It is.
Cuba's humanitarian crisis is getting worse by the day, with intensifying blackouts and skyrocketing food costs 1 month into the U.S.-imposed oil blockade. A 36-year-old named Reden de Coro told the U.S.-based independent media organization, Belly of the Beast, quote, "The future is extremely uncertain, but something has to happen somehow, because we're the ones suffering the most." Secretary of State Marco Rubio, the son of Cuban immigrants and a longtime advocate for regime change in Cuba, told Bloomberg that the U.S. will ease up its pressure campaign if Cuba opens its economy. Rubio wouldn't reveal really the end game here, though he said the Trump administration was willing to provide humanitarian aid.
So the liberation of Cuba will happen, and it will likely happen in the near future, because that's how Donald Trump rolls, isn't it? They won't be Maduroed, as I say, but they can force the removal of Cuban President Diaz-Canel, ideally accomplished by the Cuban people themselves, and then Trump will support and assist in that move. A couple of years back, on July 11, 2021, thousands of Cubans engaged in the largest anti-government protest in decades, often referred to as 11J uprising. It was fueled by shortages of food, medicine, and electricity. Well, that's exactly the case now, only this time it's even worse. Their desire to be free hasn't gone away. If anything, it intensified. Cuba's already dire economic crisis has worsened in the weeks since the United States captured Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. Venezuela was Cuba's largest supplier of oil, and that's not happening anymore. Trump is now prohibiting oil sales to Cuba via naval buildup and threatened tariffs against any country that tries to sell fuel to Havana. Trump claims that Cuba poses a national security threat to the United States, but he doesn't specify exactly how. The top U.S. envoy in Cuba, Mike Hammer, told Telemundo that he was in talks with unspecified Cuban officials to bring about political change in the country this year. Hammer suggested that Washington, aka Trump, sought to repeat its recent formula in Venezuela post-Maduro, where then Vice President Delcy Rodriguez was willing to cooperate with the U.S. demands. She became acting leader following Maduro's capture. President Trump may be seeking concessions from Havana. Well, he is seeking concessions from Havana that include opening of their economy and restrictions on military cooperation with Russia and with China. The humanitarian cost of Cuba's strategy is decidedly higher for the general population. And it is painful to watch, and it has started to prompt international criticism. It may be a necessary evil, is the best way I could put it. A group of UN experts called Trump's threat against oil supplies to Cuba a serious violation of international law. In the meantime, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Cuban-American himself, has stated the U.S. would love to see regime change.
What about Cuba? Because that's a point of interest for this Secretary of State for obvious reasons. And then he was asked this question. Let me play it for you about regime change. Here it is.
Will you make a public commitment today to rule out U.S. regime change in Cuba?
Regime change?
Yes.
Oh, no, I think we would love to see the regime there change. We would like to. That doesn't mean that we're going to make a change, but we would love to see it changed.
So are the people of Cuba supportive of regime change? Just like the majority of Venezuelans were happy about Maduro's capture. Public sentiment in Cuba regarding regime change it's difficult to measure, to say the least. Partly due to the lack of independent polling within the country, partly due to the fact that people are understandably hesitant to speak up. But there is recent data which suggests significant and growing desire for change. 2025 survey by Cyber Cuba found that 95% of the respondents, 95% of the respondents supported opening the country up to new political parties and new economic models, aka democracy. Now, while this reflects the views of social media users rather than the entire island, it does highlight a deep desire for change. Those mass protests of July 11, 2021 were really a watershed moment where thousands took to the street of Cuba, demanding libertad, liberty, and the end of one-party rule. These protests were driven by shortages of food, medicine, and basic civil liberties, all of which have gotten even worse now. Notably, just like Venezuela before Maduro's capture, Cuba is in the worst economic state in 30 years. Experts suggest that while anti-imperialist rhetoric still exists, most Cubans would welcome concessions or changes, anything that would improve their daily survival. However, while many Venezuelans celebrated the capture of Maduro, the situation in Cuba has distinct differences. The Cuban Communist Party, the PCC, declared the system constitutionally irrevocable. I'm sure that was voted on. This makes legal political transition much harder than in Venezuela. Following the 2021 protest, the Cuban government implemented severe crackdowns leading to hundreds of arrests and long-term prison sentences. Very, very serious stuff. This has created what I would call a tired majority, where they may desire change, but they're tired of the consequences of open dissent. Maybe this time is finally different. I sure hope so, for the sake of the Cuban people. Hey, thanks for stopping by O'Reilly's Corner. I hope you enjoyed being here as much as I've enjoyed having you, and I'll see you next time. This is Mike O'Reilly.